You don't need a yard, you don't need a garden bed, you don't even need soil that came from your own ground. A sunny balcony and a few plastic buckets can hand you more tomatoes than some backyard gardens ever produce. That sounds backwards, doesn't it? Most people assume tomatoes need open earth, deep beds, rows of soil baking in the sun. They believe that growing food in a bucket on a third-floor balcony is a cute hobby at best, and a sad little experiment at worst. But here's the surprising truth. A tomato plant doesn't know it's in a bucket. It only knows whether its roots are warm, fed, watered, and breathing. And on a small balcony, you can control all four of those things better than almost anyone with a big garden ever could. So today we're counting down the simple, low-cost steps that turn an ordinary plastic bucket into a tomato machine. We'll go from the solid basics to the single most powerful trick at the very end. And stay with me, because the number one method on this list is the one that lets a single bucket keep its soil evenly moist for days, cut your watering in half, and quietly outproduce nearly everything around it. Most people have never even heard of it. Before we start, do something easy for me. Drop a quick comment and tell me which direction your balcony faces, south, north, east, or west. That one detail changes everything about how your tomatoes grow, and I'll explain exactly why as we go. All right, let's get started. At number 12, we begin with the thing almost everyone gets wrong before they even plant a single seed, the bucket itself. Most people grab the smallest container they can find. A little pot, a spare ice cream tub, something that won't take up much room. And then they wonder why their plant looks thirsty by noon and stops growing by July. Here's the simple science. A tomato is a big hungry plant with a big hungry root system. Those roots need volume, they need room to spread, room to store water, and room to hold enough nutrients to feed a plant that wants to grow several feet tall. That's why the humble 5-gallon bucket is close to perfect. Most university extension programs that study container vegetables recommend at least 5 gallons of soil for a single tomato plant, and many suggest going even larger if you can. 5 gallons gives the roots enough soil to hold moisture through a hot afternoon, so the plant isn't swinging from soaked to bone dry every single day. And that swing matters more than you think. When a tomato dries out, then floods, then dries out again, it can't move calcium steadily up into the fruit. That's what causes those ugly, black, sunken spots on the bottom of the tomato. People call it blossom end rot, and they blame their soil. But surprisingly, it's almost never a soil problem. It's a watering problem. A bigger bucket smooths out that swing, and that one change prevents a heartbreak you haven't even had yet. 1 plant per 5-gallon bucket. Resist the urge to crowd 2 in to save space. They'll compete, and you'll get 2 weak plants instead of 1 strong one. And once you've got the right size container, the next question is the one almost nobody asks until it's too late. At number 11, drainage, the quiet killer of balcony tomatoes. Picture this. You buy a beautiful bucket, you fill it with soil, you plant your tomato, you water it faithfully every single day because you care. And slowly, without you noticing, you drown it. Tomato roots need air just as much as they need water. When water has nowhere to escape, it fills every space in the soil and pushes the oxygen out. The roots suffocate, the leaves turn yellow, and the gardener, watching the plant fade, assumes it needs even more water. So they give it more, and it dies faster. The fix costs you nothing but a few minutes. Drill or punch holes in the bottom of your bucket. Not one little hole, several. A good rule is 6 to 8 holes, each about 1/2 inch wide, spread across the base. Then add a few more an inch up the sides because the very bottom layer of soil tends to stay soggy. If you're on a balcony with a hard floor, raise the bucket up on a couple of bricks or small wood blocks. That gap underneath lets the water actually drain away instead of pooling and rotting the roots from below. It also keeps rusty water stains off your balcony, which your downstairs neighbor will quietly thank you for. Here's the reassuring part. You really can't overdrain a tomato. Extra water leaving the bucket is never the problem. Water trapped inside, it always is. So when in doubt, add another hole. And once that water can move freely, you've got to fill the bucket with the right stuff, because what you put in matters far more than where you put it. At number 10, skip the dirt from the ground. This one surprises almost everybody. It feels natural to scoop soil from a yard, a flower bed, or a cheap bag labeled topsoil. It's right there. It's free or close to it. And it's one of the fastest ways to ruin a container tomato. Garden soil and topsoil are too heavy for a bucket. In the ground are held loose by worms, roots, and a whole living world that keeps them open and breathing. Trap that same soil inside a bucket and it packs down into a dense, airless brick. Water sits on top. Roots can't push through. And any pest or weed seeds hiding in that soil are now locked in a small space with your plant. What you want instead is a light potting mix, the kind made for containers, full of peat or cocoa coir with perlite or bark mixed in to keep it fluffy. It holds water like a sponge, but still lets air reach the roots. That balance is exactly what a tomato craves in a bucket. You don't need the most expensive bag on the shelf. The fancy branded mixes are often the same basic ingredients with a higher price tag and a prettier label. This is one of those places where the industry sells you complexity you simply don't need. A good plain potting mix works beautifully. Mix in a couple of handfuls of compost if you have it, and your bucket is ready. And now that your roots have a perfect home to grow in, the next choice decides whether your plant fits your balcony or swallows it whole. At number 9, choosing the right kind of tomato. Get this wrong, and you'll be fighting your own plant all summer. Here's something most beginners never learn until they're tangled in vines. Tomatoes come in 2 main growth styles, and they behave like 2 completely different plants. The first kind is called determinate. These grow to a set size, usually 3 or 4 feet, then stop. They set most of their fruit in a short window, ripen it, and they're done. They're compact, tidy, and they don't take over. The second kind is called indeterminate. These are the wild ones. They keep growing taller and taller all season long, 6 feet, 8 feet, sometimes more. They produce tomatoes the whole time right up until frost, but they need serious support and serious space. On a balcony, both can work, but you choose based on what you want. For a small space and easy care, determinate and compact varieties shine. Look for names like Roma, Celebrity, Bush, Early Girl, or any variety labeled patio, bush, or dwarf. There are even tiny tomatoes bred specifically for pots that stay under 2 feet tall and still drip with fruit. If you have a railing for support and you want tomatoes from June all the way to October, an indeterminate cherry tomato is one of the most generous plants you can grow in a bucket. A single healthy plant can give you hundreds of cherry tomatoes over a season. Match the plant to your space, and gardening suddenly feels easy instead of like a wrestling match. And speaking of getting that plant off to a strong start, the next step is one most people rush, and it costs them weeks of growth. At number 8, Plant it deep, much deeper than feels right. This is one of those facts that sounds wrong the first time you hear it. With most plants, you set them in the soil at the same depth they were in the pot. Bury the stem of a pepper or a cucumber and you'll rot it. But a tomato is different, and this is genuinely one of the coolest things about the plant. Look closely at a tomato stem. See those tiny hairs running up and down it? Every one of those hairs can turn into a root. When you bury part of the stem underground, the plant grows brand new roots all along the buried section. More roots means more water, more nutrients, and a sturdier, stronger plant. So, when you plant your tomato in the bucket, strip off the lower leaves and bury the plant up to its top few sets of leaves. You can bury 2/3 of the whole plant if it's leggy. It looks alarming. You'll feel like you're burying it alive. Do it anyway. Within a couple of weeks, that buried stem becomes a thick mass of new roots, and the plant explodes with growth that surface-planted tomatoes can't match. It's free. It takes 10 extra seconds, and it's one of the biggest head starts you can give a container tomato. Now, if you've already got tomatoes in the ground in a backyard somewhere, don't tune out here, because this trick is for you too. The next time you transplant any tomato, anywhere, bury it deep, dig a deeper hole, or lay the plant sideways in a shallow trench with just the top poking out, and it'll root along the whole buried stem. No special equipment, nothing to buy, just a stronger plant in the ground or in a bucket this very weekend. And once that plant is rooting deep, it's going to start reaching for the one thing it can't live without. At number 7, chase the sun and use your balcony's exact direction. This is why I asked which way your balcony faces. Because sunlight is the fuel that turns into tomatoes, and there's no shortcut around it. A tomato needs a lot of light. 6 hours of direct sun is the bare minimum. 8 hours or more is where the real harvest comes from. Less than 6. And the plant grows leggy and pale, sets little fruit, and disappoints you no matter how perfectly you do everything else. Here's where your balcony direction matters. A south-facing balcony is the jackpot. It bathes in sun most of the day, and almost any tomato will thrive there. A west-facing balcony gets strong afternoon sun, which is also excellent, though it can get hot, so you'll water more. An east-facing balcony gets gentle morning sun and shade later, which works for cherry tomatoes and compact types, but may struggle with the big beefsteaks. And a north-facing balcony is the toughest. It gets the least direct light, so you'll want the most sun-tolerant, compact cherry varieties, and you'll want to place them right at the open edge to catch every ray. Here's the beautiful part of growing in a bucket. It moves. A tomato planted in the ground is stuck wherever you put it. But a bucket on a balcony can be slid into the sun, turned to face the light, even rolled onto a little wheeled base to chase the brightest spot through the season. You have a flexibility that in-ground gardeners can only dream about. So watch your balcony for a day. Notice where the sun actually lands and for how long. Then put your bucket in the brightest place you have. That single decision does more for your harvest than any fertilizer ever will. And once your plant is drinking in all that light, it's going to get thirsty in a way that catches a lot of new gardeners off guard. At number 6, water deeply and water smart. Containers dry out faster than the ground. There's no deep earth to pull moisture from, just the soil in that bucket and the hot air all around it. On a sunny summer day, a 5-gallon bucket with a big tomato in it can drink an astonishing amount of water. But here's the mistake almost everyone makes. They give the plant a quick little splash every day, a sip across the top. The water wets the first inch of soil and never reaches the deep roots where it matters. Water deeply instead. Pour slowly until you see water running out of those drainage holes at the bottom. That tells you the whole root zone is soaked, top to bottom. In the heat of summer, that might mean watering once a day, sometimes even twice for a large plant in a small bucket on a blazing west-facing balcony. And here's the simple test that never fails. Stick your finger 2 inches down into the soil. If it's dry at your fingertip, water. If it's still damp, wait. Your finger is a better moisture meter than any gadget you can buy. Try to water in the morning if you can. The plant fills up before the heat of the day and uses that water when it needs it most. And try to keep water off the leaves. Wet leaves in the evening invite fungus and disease. Aim for the soil, not the foliage. Steady, even moisture is the secret to smooth, unblemished tomatoes. Remember that blossom end rot we talked about? This is where you beat it. Not with chemicals, not with special sprays, just with consistent water. And believe me, there's a way to make that consistency almost automatic, which is exactly where we're headed at the very end of this list. But even perfectly watered, your plant needs to eat. And that brings us to number 5. At number 5, feed your tomatoes because a bucket runs out of food fast. In the ground, roots roam far and wide, scavenging nutrients from a huge volume of soil. In a bucket, the plant only has what's in those 5 gallons, and a fast-growing tomato burns through it quickly. Within a few weeks, even the best potting mix is running low. So you feed it, and this is simpler than the fertilizer aisle wants you to believe. Start by mixing a slow-release granular fertilizer into the soil at planting time. That gives a steady base of nutrients for the first month or two. Then, once the plant starts flowering, switch to a liquid feed every week or two. Something balanced, made for vegetables or tomatoes, mixed at the strength on the label. Here's a small but important point. Early on, the plant wants a bit more nitrogen to build leaves and stems, but once flowers and fruit arrive, too much nitrogen backfires. You get a huge, lush, beautiful green plant with hardly any tomatoes. The plant pours all its energy into leaves instead of fruit. So as it starts to flower, lean toward a fertilizer with a little less nitrogen and a bit more phosphorus and potassium, the numbers that support flowers and fruit. And let me gently bust one more myth here. You've probably heard that you should throw Epsom salt in the hole or sprinkle crushed eggshells to prevent problems and boost your harvest. The truth, backed by extension research, is that most container mixes already have enough magnesium and calcium, and the real cause of those troubles is uneven watering, not a missing mineral. Save your eggshells for the compost. Save your money on the Epsom salt. Steady water and a simple balanced feed do far more. Feed steadily, and your plant rewards you steadily. And once it's growing strong and tall, it's going to need something to hold it up, which is where so many balcony gardens fall apart. At number 4, support the plant before it needs it. A loaded tomato plant is heavy. Branches full of fruit will bend, sag, and snap. Stems left sprawling around rot and invite pests, and on a windy balcony, an unsupported tomato can be whipped around until it breaks. The trick is to add support early, right at planting time, while the plant is still small. If you wait until it's big and floppy, you'll damage the roots and stems trying to wrangle it into a cage. For compact, determinate types, a simple tomato cage pushed into the bucket is usually enough. For tall, indeterminate types, you'll want a sturdy stake, or even better, a string running up to your balcony railing or ceiling that you gently wind the growing stem around as it climbs. Here's a balcony-specific tip most people miss. Wind is your hidden enemy up high. The higher your floor, the stronger the gusts. A plant that would stand fine in a sheltered backyard can be battered on an exposed 8th floor balcony. So tie your plant securely, and if your balcony is very windy, tuck the bucket into a corner where 2 walls give it shelter. Use soft ties, strips of old t-shirt or garden tape, never thin wire that cuts into the stem. Support it early, and the plant climbs instead of sprawls, which means more fruit in less space and far less heartbreak. And good support sets up the next move perfectly, because a well-supported plant is one you can finally prune the right way. At number 3, prune for fruit, not just for leaves. This is where a balcony tomato can actually outperform a neglected garden tomato, and it costs nothing but a few minutes a week. On indeterminate tomatoes, little shoots grow in the joint between the main stem and each branch. Gardeners call them suckers. Left alone, every sucker becomes a whole new stem with its own branches, its own leaves, and its own demand for energy. The plant turns into a dense, tangled jungle that pours its strength into greenery instead of tomatoes. Pinch those suckers off while they're small, just an inch or 2 long. Use your fingers. Snap them out in the morning when the plant is firm. By removing them, you channel the plant's energy into fewer stems and bigger, faster, more abundant fruit. You also open up the plant so air moves freely through it, which dramatically cuts down on the fungal diseases that thrive in damp, crowded foliage. That airflow point matters even more on a balcony, where plants are often tucked close to walls. Good air movement keeps the leaves dry and healthy. One word of caution: don't prune determinate bush-type tomatoes this way. They have a set amount of fruit to give, and stripping their suckers just reduces your harvest. Save the pruning for the tall, indeterminate climbers. For them, removing suckers and stripping the lowest leaves off the bottom foot of stem keeps the plant clean, healthy, and focused on what you actually want: tomatoes. And keeping that plant healthy leads straight into the problem that ruins more balcony tomatoes than anything else, which is waiting at number 2. At number 2, mulch the top of your bucket. The step almost nobody bothers with. You've done everything right. Big bucket, great soil, deep planting, steady water. And then the summer sun bakes the bare surface of your soil. The moisture evaporates by midday, and the top of your root zone swings from wet to dry again and again. This is the quiet enemy of container tomatoes. That bare soil surface acts like an open window, letting your water escape into the air almost as fast as you pour it in. The fix is a simple layer of mulch on top of the soil. An inch or 2 of straw, shredded leaves, dried grass clippings, or even bark chips. That blanket shades the soil, slows evaporation, and keeps the moisture down where the roots are. Studies on mulched containers and beds consistently show big reductions in water loss. And on a hot balcony, that can mean the difference between watering twice a day and watering once. Mulch does more than save water. It keeps the soil temperature steadier, so roots aren't cooking in an overheated black bucket. It stops hard splashes of water from kicking soil and soil-borne disease up onto the lower leaves. And it smooths out exactly the kind of moisture swings that cause blossom end rot and cracked fruit. It's one of the cheapest, easiest things you can do, and it's the step most beginners skip entirely. A handful of straw on top of your bucket quietly solves 3 problems at once. And that idea, keeping moisture steady without constant effort, is the perfect doorway into the number 1 method on this list, the one that ties everything together. And that brings us to number 1, the self-watering bucket. The single most powerful trick for growing tons of tomatoes on a balcony and the one most people have never tried. Here's the deepest myth of all. People believe that growing food takes endless daily work, that you'll be a slave to your watering can all summer, that one weekend away will kill everything, that a balcony tomato is a fragile, needy thing demanding constant attention. But surprisingly, you can build a system that waters the plant for you, keeps the soil perfectly, evenly moist for days at a time, and produces more fruit because of it. And you can make it from 2 ordinary plastic buckets. It's called a self-watering container or a sub-irrigation planter. And the idea is beautifully simple. Instead of pouring water on top and watching it rush down through the soil and out the bottom, you store water in a reservoir underneath the soil. The plant then drinks that water from below, pulling up exactly as much as it needs, exactly when it needs it, through the soil itself. Here's how it works. With 2 5-gallon buckets, you take one bucket and set it inside the other, leaving a gap at the bottom that becomes your water reservoir. In the inner bucket, you cut some holes and create a wicking system, often as simple as a small cup or a section of the soil that dips down into the water below. That wick pulls moisture up into the root zone continuously. You drill one overflow hole in the outer bucket at the level of the reservoir so it can never overfill and drown the roots. Then you add a fill tube, a simple pipe down the side, so you can pour water straight into the reservoir from the top. Now here's why it changes everything. The plant's roots are never soaked and never bone dry. They sit in that sweet spot of even, constant moisture, day and night, hot afternoon and cool morning, whether you're home or not. And that steadiness is exactly what tomatoes love most. Remember every problem we've talked about? Blossom end rot from uneven water, cracked fruit from feast and famine, stunted growth from drought stress on a hot balcony. The self-watering bucket quietly solves all of them at the source. The numbers are what make people fall in love with it. A reservoir like this can hold 1 gallon or more of water, enough to keep a tomato happily watered for 2, 3, sometimes 4 days in mild weather without you touching it. Research and extension trials on sub-irrigation containers have found they can use water far more efficiently than top-watered pots because almost nothing evaporates or drains away wasted. Less water, less effort, and often more fruit. That's the rare combination that sounds too good to be true and simply isn't. And the best part is what it does to your life. You can go away for a long weekend. You can have a busy week where you barely look at your plants. You fill the reservoir, you walk away, and the system keeps your tomatoes in that perfect, even moisture the whole time. It turns the most demanding part of container gardening, the watering, into something that nearly takes care of itself. There are kits you can buy for this, of course, and some of them are nicely made, but you genuinely don't need them. 2 plastic buckets, a drill, a small plastic cup for the wick, and a length of pipe for the fill tube. Most of it you already have or can find for a few dollars. This is the heart of the whole idea behind a balcony garden. Nature already wants to grow you tomatoes. You're just building it a smarter, simpler home so it can. So picture it. A south-facing balcony, 2 5-gallon buckets nested together, a compact tomato planted deep, mulched on top, climbing a string to the railing. You fill the reservoir on Monday and pinch a sucker or 2. By August, that single bucket is heavy with fruit, ripening faster than you can eat it. And you've barely lifted a finger all week. No yard, no garden bed, no endless labor, just one clever bucket and the sun. That's the quiet truth this whole list has been building toward. Successful gardening was never about more space. It was never about more work or more money or the biggest bag of fertilizer on the shelf. It's about using the space you have intelligently, choosing the right plant, and letting simple systems do the heavy lifting. The goal isn't a perfect garden. The goal is a steady one. A few well-placed buckets, tended lightly and consistently, will feed you more reliably than a big plot you're too busy to keep up with. If you're the kind of person who'd rather grow real, fresh food simply in whatever small space you've got than overspend and overwork for it, then you already think like a balcony gardener. You just needed the buckets. So here's what I'd love you to do. Go back up to that comment box and tell me which direction your balcony faces, south, north, east, or west, and which tomato you're going to try first. Leave the comment. I read them, and your answer might be exactly the question someone else needed answered. And if a calmer, simpler way of growing more food with less effort sounds like your kind of place, stay with us. Because next, we're getting into the handful of vegetables that actually grow better in a bucket on a balcony than they ever do in the ground. And the number one on that list is a plant most people would never dream of growing in a pot. You'll want to see that one. Until then, fill your reservoir, find your sun, and let your buckets do the work. Now that your tomatoes are thriving, why stop there? Next, I'll show you 15 vegetables and herbs that actually grow better in containers than in the ground. It's starting right here. Let's keep going together.